The Cold War lasted from 1947 to 1991. We all know that it was about the rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States. But what made these two countries go against each other? Well, as a result of World War II, most countries were unstable and were focusing on regaining their strength as a nation. Because of this, there were only two remaining superpowers in the world: the United States and the Soviet Union. One was capitalist and democratic state, and the other functioned on communism. Due to this, there was no way they would put aside their differences and become allies once again. Also, because the world around them was vulnerable, the Soviet Union and the United States had to keep each other in check to make sure that the other nation would not gain control. Before we begin going more in depth about this subject, we need to understand what the Cold War was in general. Although the word war is in the title, there were no armies fighting against each other on a battlefield. Why is this? Well, this is because that was a different kind of war. The term Cold War can be described as a period of hostility between two nations in which threats are exchanged, leading them to be on the brink of war. In this case, there was political and military tension between countries in the West, such as the United States, and ones in the East, such as the Soviet Union and China. As mentioned previously, the two nations' conflicting governments was one of the factors that led them to go to war. But another reason was conflicts in Asia, the most important being the crisis over Korea.
So after World War II, Korea is split up after the Japanese surrender, and they're split up in the 38th parallel due to the decision of the Joint Soviet-American Commission. So the North was controlled by the Soviet Union, and the South was controlled by the United States. The Joint Soviet-American Commission was when the two countries came together to discuss how Korea would establish their government. The two countries ended up not agreeing to the democracies, and so they decided to split the land. And on May 1948, North Korea decides to become a Democratic People's Republic, while on August 1948, South Korea declares to be the Democratic Republic of Korea. Before the Korean War and during the war, Il Sung Kim was the leader of the North, and Seung Nam Ri was the president of the South. And one of the similarities between the two countries were that the leaders both wanted more power and more land. And even before the war started, many people were already dying due to the tension between the two. Then, on June 25th of 1950, North Korea attacked South Korea. The US believed that if they left North Korea alone, this would trigger other countries to take over countries and try to build a communist country. For that reason, while the North had a stable army and also had aid from the Soviet Union and China, South Korea was mainly aided by the United States and other countries, and they were also helped by the United Nations. Harry Truman stated that if we let Korea down, the Soviets will keep right on going and swallow up one place after another. This just shows the tension and the belief that the United States had of if North Korea was left alone with their actions against South Korea. So, as stated before, during the war, both the North and the South had support from other countries. First of all, in the case of North Korea, not only did they already have a pretty stable and well-functioning army, they also received help from the Soviet Union and China. The two countries helped since they were all communist countries and therefore shared the same beliefs and ideologies as North Korea. The Soviet Union aided the North by providing different tactics and strategies, also brought in soldiers and weapons. China started aiding the North in October of 1950, mostly by supporting the North with their soldiers. In the case of South Korea, they received help from various different countries due to the fact that the UN and its Security Council passed a resolution proposed by the United States. The resolution proposed that the UN countries should aid immediately due to the act on South Korea. After that, on June 28th, the UN passed another resolution stating that the aiding troops were allowed to attack the North Korean army. Both of the resolutions were passed right away as no one had vetoed them, and also the Soviet Union was boycotting due to a denial from the UN, stating that they would not admit the People's Republic of China officially. Even after some time had passed, the war was not ending, so the Soviet Union and the United States decided to keep the 38th parallel and split Korea into two different governing countries. This border is now called the Demilitarized Zone and is guarded by both South and North Korean soldiers to prevent people from crossing it and illegally sneaking into the country. There was no treaty made between North Korea and South Korea, which makes the war remain as a stalemate, and also there's still ongoing tension between the two countries. All the support troops and aid from the different countries left, leaving Korea abandoned and with little to no possibility of becoming one again.
So next we're going to be talking about the effects on the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War was considered a Cold War era proxy war and took place from November 1955 to April 1975. One of the biggest reasons to prove that the Cold War affected the Vietnam War can be related to the domino effect, which was the idea that if one Asian nation fell to the leftist ideology, which would be communism, others would soon follow. That's why both the communists and the capitalists fought for a country run by their ideals. The roots of the Vietnam War can be traced back to before World War II, when Vietnam was part of the French Empire. In the 1940s, communist Vietnamese rebels strived for independence from French colonialism, and after World War II, South Vietnam was still given back to the French, and the North was left in the hands of the non-communist Chinese. The nationalist Chinese treated the North Vietnamese very badly, which made support for the communist leader Ho Chi Minh grow until his party finally took over in 1946. His party taking over meant that there was now a high risk of Vietnam becoming a communist country, and because of that, the US started sending troops to aid the French in 1950. These troops fought alongside the French against the North in something called the First Indochina War. This war took place from 1946 till 1954, and because of the destruction that was caused by it, by 1956, Vietnam had permanently been divided into two by the world's powers in the 17th parallel. By now, Bao Dai was leading the South by Western support, and Ho Chi Minh, the North, with support from the Soviet Union. By March 1959, Ho Chi Minh declares all-out war to unite Vietnam under a single ruler. If Minh were to win the war, Vietnam would become a communist-run country, and other Asian countries might quickly join in, sparking the start of the domino theory. So of course the US felt that something needed to be done. So the US decided to take direct role in the war. Strongly anti-communist Ngo Dinh Diem pushed Bao aside to become president of the government of the Republic of Vietnam, and US started supporting Diem by sending military equipment and training from US police and military. A coup by some of his own generals succeeded in killing Diem and his brother Ngo Dinh Mu on November 1963, 3 weeks before Kennedy was assassinated. The increasing political instability in South Vietnam persuaded Kennedy's next in line, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara to keep increasing U.S. military and economic support. Deemed security forces arrested some 100,000 people, many of whom were tortured and executed. Kennedy kept sending troops without wanting a large-scale military intervention. Nevertheless, by 1962, U.S. military presence in South Vietnam was about 9,000 troops, compared to fewer than 800 during the 1950s. On August 1964, U.S. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution after North Vietnamese soldiers attacked 2 U.S. warships. This resolution enabled the U.S. to make use of non-nuclear military forces without a formal declaration of war. In a letter to Ngo Dinh Diem, J.F. Kennedy said, "Let me assure you that the United States is determined to help Vietnam preserve its independence, protect its people against communist assassins, and build a better life through economic growth." John F. Kennedy wrote this letter to Diem on October 26, 1961, saying that the help received from the U.S. would improve economic growth, protect its people, and preserve its independence. But in reality, They were sending hundreds of thousands of soldiers, destroying landscapes, towns and cities through bombings and shootings, and arrested about 100,000 people, many of whom were tortured and executed because of suspicions of them being communist and having further helpful information. By the end of the Vietnam War, hundreds of thousands of US soldiers were drafted to help fight against the communists in a costly and ultimately unsuccessful war that brought both domestic civil unrest and international embarrassment. The Vietnam War was directly related to the rivalries of the Cold War, since it was all about whether the rulers of the country were supported by the Soviet Union's communist ideologies or those of the United States.
Let's take Indonesia as an example. On the 30th of September 1965, there was a coup attempt made by the PKI, which stands for the Indonesian Communist Party, in which several important and influential Indonesian generals were killed. During this time, the president was named Sukarno, and he happened to be Indonesia's first president and an independence leader who fought for Indonesia's independence from Netherlands. Even though he had a huge impact on the nation, another individual who was greatly valued was Suharto. He was a general in the Indonesian army, and he convinced the people that President Sukarno was involved in the coup attempt, which removed Sukarno from his position as the president. Suharto held a lot of power as he had gained people's support, and hence he became the second Indonesian president. One of the things he did after acquiring this power was order the military to arrest communists. This became a huge issue as people who did not support Suharto but were not communists either ended up being arrested as well, simply because they did not support Suharto. To this day, no one has been put on trial or taken responsibility for the deaths of those communists. This has been an ongoing problem that goes to show the fact that individuals in the past continue to affect the lives of those today. Just like in Indonesia, every nation has somehow been shaped by the actions of other individuals and has had to face the consequences. This cause and effect can never be erased because of the nature of war. War triggers individuals to act out in ways which benefit their cause, but not necessarily the issue at hand. We can conclude that Asia was severely affected by the Cold War due to clashing ideologies and the way that these ideologies were used and manipulated by a myriad of individuals.